Good evening, folks. It's really lovely to see such a big crowd tonight for this one of the final Common Reading events of the semester. I'm Karen Weatherman. I am chair of the Common Reading program, and on behalf of all of us who work in this program and also within my larger unit of undergraduate education, I want to welcome you tonight for Robbie Cooper's talk on the value of self-care. This is one of a whole year's series of talks and events of different kinds that relate in different kinds of ways to this year's Common Reading book, Soonish. Some are highlighting sort of cutting edge research being done at the university. Some are more about resources that can help you with your own soonish future and launching yourself. And this is sort of a hybrid between the two. Some about new areas of research and some about ways to sort of have the best tools in your own toolkit to allow you to achieve the things that you want to achieve. We especially want to welcome today the Global Campus students who are attending via live stream. It's great to have folks with us who are not even in this room. So thanks so much. There are still 3 Common Reading events left for the semester. We end next week with student presentations from 2 different classes, HD 205 and SOE 110. And both have used Soonish as a starting point for semester projects. The HD 205 class is going to be Tuesday at 5:30 in Todd Auditorium. And that is a final film festival. They have been tasked with creating short films that are about various sort of social action projects. And they've already winnowed them down to the finalists and the attendees at 5:30 next Tuesday. And Todd Odd will be helping to vote on the winners of those projects. Those have been very fun in the past. Then on Thursday and Friday, SOE 110 is going to have their students present. I think they're in poster format. The semester-long projects they have done around sustainable cities. That's an Ensminger Pavilion, which if you have not been there, which maybe many of you have not, it's an old livestock pavilion that has been converted into kind of cool space, and it's right in back of Leidy. If you went through the back doors of Leidy, it would be kind of off to the left, sort of on the side of the rugby field there in back of Leidy, if that makes sense. There is a presentation Thursday at 2:50 in the afternoon and Friday at 8 a.m. if you want to get up really early and get Common Reading credit. More about those remaining events can be found both on the Common Reading Cooksink page and on our Common Reading website, which is commonreading.wsu.edu. If you're attending for Common Reading credit, I'll be card swiping right there at the conclusion of the event. And to have this show up on your Cooksink involvement page, there is a required post-event survey with a few questions that will be emailed to whatever email account you have associated with Cooksink. So it could be your WSU email, but if that's not what you have registered in Cooksink, it will go to whatever that email is. It's also accessible, the survey is also accessible from your Cooksink involvement page. Thank you for completing that, taking a few minutes. It tells us important information about sort of who's attending from what classes, and your reactions to different events, and that helps us plan forward, looking at the kinds of things that most match people's interests. If you also have questions about how to verify attendance, there's a link to instructions on the Common Reading homepage. So now to introduce tonight's presenter. Dr. Robbie Cooper is a clinical professor in the Department of Human Development. Originally from the small farm town of Cameron, Missouri, Robbie earned his Bachelor of Science from Southeast Missouri State University and his MS and PhD from Penn State. Dr. Cooper researches topics around college student success and well-being, as well as experiential and outdoor education. Prior to becoming a university professor, Dr. Cooper spent several years directing wilderness experience programs. He's been teaching at WSU since 2012, and during that time, he's received several awards for his teaching, including the Richard Law Excellence Award for undergraduate teaching. In fact, the fact that I know that he's from Cameron, Missouri, is because he was selected by ambassadors in Connors, the college in which his own home department is, as a faculty member that they especially wanted to highlight. So he, I know, is a respected and well-loved professor here on our campus. And given how stressful this time in the semester can be, I'm especially pleased to have Dr. Cooper talk with us this evening about self-care. So please help me welcome him this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thanks everyone for coming. This is surprising. I wasn't sure with the weather that we're having tonight if people were going to be walking around campus and coming. You know, some people have to come quite a ways to get to Spark Building. So I appreciate you being here. Let's see. This idea, this topic of talking about self-care as part of the Common Reading series is something that Karen and I started talking about, I think earlier this semester, and something that when I asked my own class of first-year focus students this semester, you know, gave them a few different ideas of things that I was thinking about related to the book and that would be a good topic for students. Overwhelmingly, the class of 100 students said they wanted to hear about self-care and they wanted to think about self-care and focus on self-care as something that they would like to focus on a bit more in their lives. So the connection to sort of the theme of the book, for me, the original idea was that if we're sort of looking to the future, looking how things are changing and advancing and shifting in terms of well-being, which is what I'm concerned about as a human development professor and as someone who's particularly interested in helping my students not just survive college but thrive in college, and how to make sure that they're healthy when they're doing it. There are huge pieces of succeeding in college that don't have anything to do with taking tests or reading a lot of articles or anything like that, but things like your emotional well-being and your social support network and those kind of things are some of the biggest predictors of successful transition to college and successful performance in college, right? So I'm very much focused on not just the student as an academic person in my classroom, but also as a person, right? And someone who should be taking care of themselves, and how can I help do that, and so on. And when I think about sort of where we're going in terms of health and well-being, one of the things that I've noticed recently, and I've gotten into, developed a real interest in it academically and personally, is a trend toward. I'll talk about someone named Kelly Wilson here in a moment. He calls it first medicine. Is, if there's something going on with my well-being, right? In the past, I would say, oh, I've got this pain. I go to the doctor and say, I've got this pain, or I go to the doctor and my doctor says my blood pressure's high, right? And they'd say, okay, here's a pill, take this pill. That'll lower your blood pressure, right? What I see now more and more, and what I see, I think, going forward, is people being less about, taking a pill to lower that blood pressure, and looking to the future, sort of like looking to the past. Is what am I doing? Like what's going on in my life that this, my blood pressure might be slowly rising. It might be the foods that I'm eating. It might be the stress that I'm experiencing. Do you guys know anything about stress? Yeah, it might be the stress that I'm experiencing. I found out, this is a year or so ago, my doctor was seeing my blood pressure kind of, increase a little bit at a time, and my blood pressure's always been a little high, even when I was young and thin and training constantly, but it was kind of just gradually going up. And he started asking me questions, and we figured out that my blood pressure was going up because of my sleep. And we found out that I had sleep apnea, and that the quality of my sleep was responsible for my blood pressure. So I don't have to take a pill to lower my blood pressure. I just needed to change my sleep habits. It's a very simple thing. That's what Kelly talks about when he talks about first medicine. He's got a really cool talk online. And a lot of what I do is inspired by that talk. I've showed it to a lot of my students. How many students do I have in here? How many present students? Anybody? Couple? Past students? oh, that's kind of cool. I'm really used to talking to the same people over and over. Actually, I'm teaching HD 350 right now, and literally like 50% or more of the class are former students I've had in the past. So that's kind of cool, actually. So I've shown this talk of his, and the theme of his talk is, he says, we have a stone in our shoe. He's like, if you had a stone in your shoe and it gave you heel pain, right, and you went to the doctor and said, oh, my heel hurts, the doctor could give you like a painkiller, right, and your heel would probably hurt less, right, or you could just take the stone out of your shoe, right, like if there's something you're doing that's making you sick or just a little less well than you could be, like change the thing that you're doing. So to me, that's where I see a lot of people going. And people are, compared to people my age or my parents' generation, I think people more and more, and even people my age, are looking for, like, how can I change my lifestyle instead of, taking another pill or something like that. Is this going to work? I really don't want to be tied to the podium. All right, so we'll see if we can get this to work. So, as I said, I feel like I have to give credit to Dr. Kelly Wilson because he's a person he's one of my professional and academic heroes. He's somebody that has really influenced the way that I think about health and well-being and the way that I try to encourage my students to take care of themselves. This is my introduction to thinking about self-care, was through Kelly. So Kelly is he's a Washington native, grew up in Washington, over on the west side. He did his bachelor's degree at Gonzaga, and then went on to study at Reno, University of Nevada, Reno, and for a long, long time since then has been a professor of psychology at the University of Mississippi. He actually just retired. He's what we call Professor Emeritus now. I don't know if you guys know this, but most professors never really retire. We become Professor Emeritus, which means we're kind of retired. We don't have to do as much of the stuff we don't want to do, but we never stop working, right? So that's where he is now. He's kind of at the tail end of his career. He's doing what he wants, and what he's doing now is he's traveling the entire world doing workshops on self-care, talking to people literally all over the world. He's constantly traveling. I see it on Facebook all the time. But I saw a workshop that he did first in Spokane, went up there for a workshop, and the people from WSU that went up there liked him so much, we actually asked him to come to WSU, and he did a 2-day workshop for us the following year. And so I had that workshop with him. I then did a 5-day workshop with him with another subgroup of the group of WSU people that brought him here in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And then this past February, I went to a training where he was one of 4 speakers. So I've spent lots of hours learning from Kelly, and he's definitely the inspiration for me starting down this road. And a lot of the practices that I talk about are practices that I've heard Kelly talk about, and I've thought about. Okay, well, he's talking about how does this apply to everybody? How does this apply to him as a Kelly had this interesting journey of being sort of like a academic, sort of couch potato, not really that active, not getting enough sleep, like a lot of us do, to now all of his posts on Facebook are him, barefoot trail running and doing 90-minute hot yoga sessions and stuff like that. And so that, to me, I want to see, okay, how does this 60-year-old dude approach self-care? Maybe that's not the same as my, young adult college student. So how can I adjust this to fit my target audience, which is all of you? Okay. So I kind of feel like I'm getting ahead of myself, which I tend to do. Don't worry, it all gets figured out. My clicker's throwing me off too. So one of the reasons I think about self-care as an important health concept, a health focus for my students is that the vast majority of my students, almost all of them, are somewhere between 18 and 22 years old, if not a little bit off from that, right? So they're emerging adults, right? And as a developmental academic, as someone who teaches a class on development, human development across the entire lifespan, I think about where my students are in that entire lifespan. And you can look at, what encourages healthy development for a toddler, right? I've got a son who's about to turn 2 right now, right? So what's important for his development? Well, I know it's really important for him to develop a good, secure attachment to me and have that social connection. I know it's really important to surround him with a lot of language, books, and songs and talking to help his language development. But when I look at my college students, I know that you guys are at the peak of your physical development. You're at the peak of your physical capabilities. You're not on the downslope yet, like I am, right? Your brains are almost fully physically formed. Your brain waves, your cognition is at the adult level. Your social and emotional development is at the adult level. And so, what promotes healthy development for your average 20-year-old? To me, it's self-care. It's what are the choices that we're making, right? And not only are you, most of the people in this room, living in that stage of life, in that situation, you're also people who are in college, right? And every week we're asking you to tax your brains and use all the energy and brain power you have to do as well as you can in school. And very simple things like sleep and nutrition, stress management are really important for college students in particular. And I'll say, as we age, the importance of those choices just magnify. They become even more obvious. I used to, when I was like the age of most people in the room, I used to gain weight really easily and lose weight really easily. That's still half the case for me. You guess which case? Still pretty easy to gain weight, but losing weight, I'm like, I can't just shed all these pounds in a few weeks now. No, I can't. So as we age, it becomes even more important, which I think is another reason for young people, young adults to think about, how do I make sure that I'm starting on the right track? I'm not having to make up time, okay? I just realized I have my own clicker too, and maybe I can use this one instead of the room's clicker. I really hate being tied to the podium. The few students in here that know me probably know that. Maybe it's just whatever's going on with the system. Okay. So, another thing that I've done a lot of work on, and the title of the talk is The Value of Self-Care. Another one of the things that I've done a lot of work with students on is identifying, there's this phrase now, living my best life. You guys hear this all the time? I find it annoying. I don't know why, I don't like it. But it's essentially what I work with students all the time on, is what is the most important, what is most important to you in your life, right? What do you value? If you could think about your best life, right? I often say, think about your most meaningful, fulfilling life, not your easiest or most comfortable life, because that might not have any meaning in it at all. It might be really comfortable, but who cares what you're doing? But the most meaningful, sort of fulfilling life you could have. And when I do this work with students, a lot of times I'm talking about self-care as an essential value, right? And some students talk about how much they value education, some talk about how much they value family. And I argue that no matter what it is that you care about, self-care impacts all of those things, right? I know that if you really value education, if you want to do as well as possible, maybe you've got one of those majors where you have to get near perfect GPA and you've got some really difficult classes, right? I know that the quality of your sleep, the nutrition you put in your body, all those sorts of things impact that education value that's so important to you. I had a really great example of this a couple years ago, teaching a course. We were working on identifying values, identifying what's most important to us. And I had a student in the class who had a couple young children, and she kind of did the thing that lots of moms do, that my mom did, that lots of moms that I know do, is she put the kids first all the time, right? She's always sacrificing her own sleep, her own free time, what she wanted to do with it. She's sacrificing all those things because she's putting all her energy into her children. It's an admirable thing. There's nothing wrong with that, right? The cool thing is over the course of a few weeks of that semester, working with her, we kind of realized that taking care of herself, like taking time for herself, didn't make her worse as a mother. It made her better, right? She was a happier, healthier, more fulfilled person, and it made it easier for her to raise her kids. It was a really cool kind of realization and process that we went through that semester. So I would argue that no matter what's important to you, self-care is going to impact all of those things, okay? So tonight what I want to talk about, and I don't want this to be, this is not really the way that I work, I don't want this to be I talk at you for an hour and a half. I want this to be something that is not about me and my slides, but is about each person in the room and how this works for you, okay? So what we'll start out with is what gets in the way, right, of good self-care. If you think about, what are the best things I could be doing to take care of myself, right? Or what are the ways in which I could be what's the word that I'm looking for right now? Encouraging or improving my health and well-being. What gets in the way of that, right? So the first question, and I made handouts for this, but and I thought I made way too many, but apparently I made way too few because so many of you showed up. So let's just do this like this. A lot of people have notebooks, a lot of people have laptops. I'm going to ask you to take some time for yourself to kind of think about this. If you've got a notebook or if you've got a laptop, you can go ahead and use that. I can also pass around handouts and pens for people who don't have those things to do that. But the first question I want you to think about in terms of how this applies to you, okay, is what gets in the way of that? What are the, you could call them threats. What are the threats to your health and well-being? And it could be very, very simple things, right? Like most of my students, when I ask them, don't sleep nearly enough, right? Does that sound familiar? I'm walking through classrooms, I look at my student, and they're yawning, like this savage yawn, this extreme yawn, and I'm like, you tired? And they're like, yeah. And then I always ask, are you getting enough sleep? And no one has ever said yes. No one has ever said yes in all the students that I've asked this. So it can be very simple things like that, okay? But I want to start there. So I'll come around with handouts for people that want them, but then if you want to use laptops and your notebooks and things, just a little bit of sort of free writing. Just try to keep writing with the time that I give you. And just this question is, what gets in the way of my self-care, my health and well-being? Okay, go ahead. And for people who are getting the handout, there are two questions. We're only worried about the first question for now. Anybody over here want one? Do you want one? Does anyone want to borrow a pen? Somebody over here wanted one, right? Did you want a pen? Do we need pens? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anybody else pens? Did you need one? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you need one? All right. Looks like people are chatting, and that's actually what I want to encourage right now. If you could, with a person or a couple people next to you, talk a little bit about what you thought about and what you wrote about in terms of what do you think gets in the way of self-care for college students, for you and people like you. Okay, go ahead. That's not good. No, I don't like that. All right. So in a moment, I'm going to start talking about issues that I think are true for college students and most people in terms of being things that get in the way of our health and well-being. If self-care is simply basic practices that improve our health and well-being, what are we doing, right? That isn't taking us in that direction. So I'd like to hear from some of you, like what are things that you identified in terms of things that get in the way for you in terms of your self-care? Yeah. Procrastination, okay. So what does that do for your health and well-being? How's that related? Like I can see how that's related to like a deadline or something like that, but how does that relate to health and well-being?
I have a lot of free time.
Uh-huh.
Well, like I have a lot of time, so I should be studying and doing my work.
Mm-hmm.
But then I put that off until like 11 p.m. at night,
Okay.
so I don't sleep.
And so you don't sleep, right? And then what kind of food do you eat at midnight, right? And it was true, maybe not true for you, but for a lot of people, and then does waiting till the last moment feel stressful, right? Like, so we can connect this to a few different areas in terms of health and well-being. What else? Yeah. YouTube? Yeah, so distractions? Yeah. What does that have to do with your health and well-being? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What does that have to do with your health?
I do that instead of doing other things I should be doing.
Yeah. So it's pretty sedentary. Usually we're not doing it on the treadmill, right? So it's pretty sedentary. It might get in the way of our sleep patterns. Might stress us out if we get behind on things. It also, I don't know, it might be true for some people, but to me, I don't find much meaning in watching random videos online. I get amusement out of it, and I definitely do it too. But a part of taking care of ourselves is doing things that are important to us. So we're missing out on that when we do things that are sort of trivial. What else? Yeah. What's that? What gets in the way of your self-care? Okay, how do those relate? Okay. Yeah, so the health implication is your stress, right? The source of the stress, the primary event is the financial stress, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, having a hard time finding good nutrition, right? Like even if I'm motivated to do it, it can be, and this is one of those times, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it can be hard sometimes to resist the urge of convenience. It can be hard, I have students who say, if I were, the only way I can get a healthy option on campus is if I take a 12-minute walk, right? And the place right where I live doesn't have any healthy options. I got to walk 12 minutes to get to it. And I say, great. You get some exercise too. Nutrition and exercise, right? And I'm not trying to make them feel bad about that. I do the same exact things. But what I am trying to have them think about is maybe not what is it. It's not what you want to do, right? Like if it's raining and dark and cold like it is today, I don't want to walk 12 minutes to get some better food. So I might not want to, but am I willing to? Like that's a big question is, am I willing to? And it relates to the question on the screen right now. This is a question that's used a lot in these trainings and workshops that I go to, and used in the community that I work in. Is very simple, like, what are you doing, and how's that working out for you, right? Because we're talking about like choices we're making. That's sort of what it boils down to. And it's a very cut and dry way of thinking about it. So what are you doing? Well, I'm kind of taking the convenient route every day, right? How's that working out for you? Well, I'm not getting the food that I want and that I know makes me feel better, makes me think better, makes me a better student, and so on. So all these, you guys are picking up on a lot of the health concerns, the self-care concerns that I often hear from students and that I try to help them with, right? These are some of the really big ones. We talk about like what makes people sick in terms of, not in terms of, I get sick because I contracted a virus or I was exposed to something, or I got sick because I got into an accident and my body was injured. But what makes us sick, or what makes us unwell in terms of like how we take care of ourselves and the choices we make? Top of the list right there, I already talked about it, lack of sleep. Right? This is something I'll talk about here in a moment. A big one, nutrition. Right? I already started talking about that, the impacts of nutrition on not just things like, what kind of shape am I in, but how does my brain work? Right? A lack of exercise. Most of my college students are pretty active people, especially relative to the general population, I think. But still have a lot that say like they'd like to be a little bit more active, and it relates, to other areas of self-care. Exposure to stress is one that I hear a lot. We heard I think every example that we heard of people, talking about what gets in the way. Every one of those things, related to exposure to stress. I actually, in my lifespan development class, when we talk about stress as a health concern, I give my students a stress test. It's a standard stress test out of the University of Stanford. And I give them not just the test, but I give them the test, and then I give them, okay, these are the average scores, stress scores, for people in your age bracket, people of the same gender, people of the same educational level, and all that kind of stuff. And my students I find they're pretty stressed. They score, most of them score pretty much above average, above the average, if not far above the average. So I hear a lot about stress from my students. Exposure to toxins. And that could be lots of things. That could be, exposure to illicit drugs, to excessive alcohol. It could be exposure to social toxins, right? Social stressors can be a big barrier to well-being for anyone, but for college students on a college campus. I mentioned earlier, social support is one of the biggest predictors of successful transition to and success in college. And the last one, maybe not as obvious, but to me it makes a lot of sense, and it actually came up in one of the examples that we heard from you all just now, is like, what do I do with my free time? Am I procrastinating? And am I spending too much time watching YouTube videos? What am I doing with my time? And I'll kind of talk about this here in a little bit, about the importance of meaningful activity, okay? All right. So we'll start with sleep, maybe something that people don't think about too much, or they think, oh, well, it's very normal for college students to not get enough sleep, which is probably true. That doesn't make it a good idea. There are a lot of implications of, in terms of lack of quality sleep that relate to our health and well-being. I already talked about the importance of sleep for cognitive function. Everybody in here is in the business of brain power. Like, everybody in here needs their brain to do what their primary objective is right now, which is to do well in school and hopefully get a degree. So we know that lack of sleep is going to negatively impact your cognitive function. And even people who seem to function relatively well with little sleep, or with less sleep, they still function better with more sleep. It's still good. It's good for everybody. It has implications for the way your metabolism works. It's related to weight gain. It's related to blood pressure. As I said, that's the way that I found out I have this sleep condition is my doctor started asking me questions about my blood pressure, right? And I recently, is there anybody in the room that witnessed this in October? I have epilepsy. So I have seizures. I have grand mal seizures, and I haven't had one in let's see, I hadn't had one in 8 years. I have a medication that controls it. During class 6 weeks ago or something, maybe not even that long ago, in early October, I had a grand mal seizure in the middle of my lecture. And I fell into some desks and ended up in the emergency room. And I was totally shocked because this hasn't been happening to me for several years, and I looked into it. It's called a breakthrough seizure. What predicts these types of seizures? Lack of sleep, stress. And I thought about it, and I was like, I haven't even been noticing like how the quality of my sleep lately, the stress levels I've been experiencing. And so like I ended up in the ER because I wasn't taking care of myself and getting enough sleep, and I was getting a little bit too stressed out, right? In terms of your mood, it impacts your mood, right? You're high risk for depression if you're not getting good sleep. One of the reasons why it impacts your cognition so much, why it impacts your ability to think and do well in school, is that when you sleep, when you get into good quality sleep, your brain is cleaning itself. The neurons in your brain shrink. You get rush of cerebral spinal fluid in your brain, and it cleans out proteins that aren't good for your brain, basically. So if you've had this experience, I'm sure almost everyone's had this experience. You don't get enough sleep, and the next day, how do you feel? A lot of people use the word like foggy, right? You just feel kind of slow, kind of foggy. Your brain's, that's because your brain is not doing what it needs to do when you sleep, which is clean. And what happens when you have another night of not enough sleep or not enough good sleep? It gets worse, right? It gets worse and worse, right? How many students on our campus are, think they have or been diagnosed with or are being medicated for attention deficit? Quite a lot, right? More and more and more. I'm one of those people. I'm not on medication, but I have been diagnosed. The thing is that I often wonder how many of my students who are being treated for this or believe they have it, really have it, how many are inducing symptoms of ADHD because they're not getting enough sleep? You can take a person that doesn't have that condition, deprive them of sleep, and you can create the symptoms of attention deficit in those individuals. Is attention span good? Is it useful for college? Is it important for college? Absolutely, right? So lots of implications in terms of the importance of sleep. So what do we do about this? I'm not just going to give you the bad news, but what do we do about it? There are you can find whole programs. They call them sleep hygiene programs, right? And they're meant to help you learn how to sleep better, how to get better sleep for people who have real problems with this. And they recommend things like creating a routine, right? Our bodies are meant to work, like on a clock, right? And having consistent times to bed and times to wake really help. Not eating food or drinking alcohol or caffeine too close to bedtime, those things can interfere with our quality of sleep. Sometimes when people say, I'm really not a good sleeper, the best thing to ask them is, well, do you get any exercise, right? And they might say, no, I never exercise. And it's like, well, try working out really hard. You'll probably sleep better. You got to burn off some of that energy to make yourself tired. There's this one tip that I sometimes get giggles whenever I say, only use your bed for sleeping, right? Does anyone know why people giggle about that? Go ahead, continue to have sex in your bed, it's okay. What I'm talking about is using your bed as your couch, as your dining room table, as your, I watch TV, I watch YouTube, I eat my meals, I do all this stuff in bed, right? It's one of the things that's recommended is, the bed is for sleeping, right? So that when I get in bed, my brain and my body start getting into that place of, okay, it's time to sleep now, okay? And that's real basic. This is something that they tell you to do with babies. This is something I do with my son James, and he sleeps really well because that's all he does in that crib, right? So this has become really easy programming. You give him a bottle of milk, you put him, or a sippy cup of milk, you put him in the bed, and he's out. It's real nice. He knows that place is for sleep. That's not where he eats dinner. Also, how many people are familiar with mindfulness? This is a tip that I'll bring up in lots of my recommendations for self-care because it relates to all these so well. So mindfulness is the practice of becoming more connected to the present moment, becoming more aware of what's going on. It can look like a breathing exercise. It can look like a meditation. It can look like the way that I eat my dinner, right? If I'm being more aware and focused when I do it. And studies on mindfulness programs for sleep show that just doing simple mindfulness programs that are just general, they have nothing to do with sleep specifically, are just as effective as programs that people try that are intended specifically to help them sleep, right? And I have friends that have done this with great success, and they didn't even really know what they were doing, but when they lay down in bed, they try to kind of quiet the mind a bit by just focusing on their breath, focusing on this is where I am right now, this is what I'm doing right now, right? Our brains tend to run quite a bit, and it gets in the way of sleep. Nutrition, right? I've talked about nutrition a bit already, but this is related to a lot of areas of self-care, and some are really obvious things like our weight, our physical, like our shape, and things like that. So it's related to weight problems, obesity, central adiposity, things like that. But beyond that, it's related to a lot of other things too. It affects our mood, right? It does also affect our ability to think, right? We know that bad nutrition produces bad thinking. It's very clear. Those things are related. And so, for some students, a big adjustment for them is focusing on the nutrition, being willing to take like the 12-minute walk to get some good nutrition, because I know it's going to make me actually a better student. So what should we do? Well, not too much is pretty obvious. My advisor in graduate school was this very sort of like matter-of-fact, funny, but like kind of straightforward guy from Wisconsin. And he's like, yeah, I know the secret of weight loss. And I'm, okay, what's that? And he goes, eat less, exercise more. Like, it's easy, right? So not too much, right? And the right kinds of things. And I do believe there's a lot of individual variation in terms of like what foods work for specific individuals. I don't think it's cut and dry, but trying to eliminate some of the like the refined carbs that we eat a lot of. Sugar, I don't know if you know that sugar increases inflammation in the body. There's studies on like what happens when I go and I eat a really like processed, sugary, carb-heavy meal from like McDonald's or something. And you can have someone eat a meal and track their body, and you see their central inflammatory processes ramp up as a result of eating a meal, right? Just eating breakfast or something like that. Trying to eat. I had an undergraduate student TA last year who was really into. He was a sports training or athletic training major. He's really into nutrition and things like that. And what he said was like, eat a lot of colors, right? Eat all of the colors. So if all of your food is sort of like beige, that's you're probably not getting a lot of nutrients. If you're like those little kids who won't eat anything but chicken nuggets and French fries and cheese sticks, right? Everything's tan. There's probably not as much nutrition as if you're eating, like dark green things. Except we can't eat romaine lettuce anymore. It's more dangerous than disease right now. But dark green things, like purple things, red things, orange things. Like he would say, like eat all the colors is what he said. What I try to do is when I go grocery shopping, stay to the outside of the store, where things like produce and fresh meats and dairy and things like that are, and out of the middle where all the boxes and cans are, because that's usually not where I find the good stuff. This is kind of, this is maybe a little bit less obvious and a little bit less well known, is having healthy gut health, right? And by that I mean the health of your digestive system. There's like a whole ecosystem of bacteria in your gut and like your intestines and stuff like that, that we're finding out now, this is more recent research, is related to your mood. It's related to your stress management. It's related to the way your body responds to stress. It's related to your brain function, right, and your cognition, which is really important. Okay. So that might not be as obvious. But that's simple stuff too, like, not too much sugar, because we know sugar kind of disrupts, not too much alcohol, because alcohol tends to disrupt gut health, and eating things that have good bacteria in them. Very simple things like real yogurt, right? It's really simple. And now you can go to the store and get like kombucha on tap and stuff like that. So it's becoming a lot easier. Like, people are learning the importance of gut health. That's why you see that stuff in all the stores now. And then the last thing that I recommend is, again, mindfulness. And in this case, what I mean is being mindful about the way that you consume your food, right? How many people have had the experience of, like, you open like a bag of Oreos or something like that, and then the next thing you know, the Oreos are all gone, and you're not sure what just happened, right? Like that bag of chips or something like that. Like, where did this go? I think being mindful about the way that we eat, slowing down, not distracting ourselves while we eat, means that we're probably more likely to be aware of when we're satiated. Not when we're miserable, or not when the food just runs out, but when we're actually, like, we're satiated, we're satisfied, we don't need anymore. Human beings nowadays, or I don't know, human beings tend to be kind of stupid with the way they eat. And there's studies of, like, if you just give somebody a bigger plate, they'll take more food and they'll eat more food, right? I think it's a sign of us eating sort of mindlessly. So being more mindful, paying attention, maybe not watching TV while I eat and things like that. All right, exercise. As I said, a lot of my students are pretty active. I don't think exercise is as much a concern for them as it is people like in my age bracket or people in general. But for a lot of students, it still is. Even my students who look fit, they say, oh, I really should be more active. I should get some more exercise. And it's good for anybody, right? Doesn't matter if you're someone like me who's trying to lose some weight, or if you're somebody who's, looks totally healthy. Exercise is good for you. It relates to things like, the way that you sleep. I find it relates to my diet. Like, it influences my diet. I know, when I used to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like 5 days a week, right? And if I eat the wrong food, right, the day before the day of training, I'm going to feel really bad when I go and I work out really hard. And so the fact that I was exercising also meant that I was eating a lot better, right? And my advice with exercise, there are a lot of different things that people like doing. Some people like running really long distances. That makes no sense to me. What do you do when you get there? You just come back? I don't know. Running to me is so boring. Some people love it. To me, it's so boring. Some people are really into like short duration, high intensity workouts, right? Some people are really into, like, if I'm going to exercise, it needs to be like group exercise. My wife Brittany loves doing things that are like group, like, sort of like a fitness class where she has someone coaching her and she's got other people doing it with her. She really likes that. So my advice with exercise is do the kind you'll do. Right? Like, if you ask me to go run on a treadmill, like, I spend the whole time thinking, when is this over? This is so boring. I don't want to be doing this anymore. But when I go Sunday mornings and play in my basketball game that me and my friends play on Sunday mornings, I'll play for a couple hours, and I won't be thinking, when's this over? When can I stop? I'm just thinking about playing basketball. So that's my advice: is like, do the kind you'll do. Find what you like and do that. All right. What about stress, right? How many people in the room feel like stress is an issue for them? How many people didn't hear that question? Because I don't think that's enough hands. How many people think that stress is an issue for you? Yeah, right? Very common. When I ask students about how they're doing, right? The things they'll actually respond with are, I'm tired and I'm stressed, right? And stress isn't just about, like, I don't feel great today, like I'm anxious, right? It relates to a lot of other health issues. Stress, can elevate our blood pressure, can elevate our heart rate. It has effects on not just direct things like that, but on our behaviors. So sometimes when people get stressed out, they start like smoking more, or they start like drinking more to kind of numb that, right? People who are more stressed, tend to actually like listen to their doctors less. They'll follow doctors' orders less often than people who aren't as stressed. So there's all these effects, right? And the thing is that stress is not a bad thing. Stress is actually a good thing in its intended form, okay? What's the purpose of stress? Like, why is it good to be stressed? Yeah. What's that? That's not what I'm looking for. Stress is a response to danger, right? And it's a very natural form. Stress is an evolutionary, adaptive survival function, right? And so being stressed in like acute, dangerous situations is not a bad thing, and it's not really bad for our health, right? There's a behavioral biologist, Robert Sapolsky, who wrote this book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And this is one of those things that I first learned about or heard about Kelly talking about, was this book. And basically, the basic premise of the book is that zebras don't get ulcers, right? Has anyone ever known someone who got an ulcer from being stressed? Yeah, I do, because I work in academia. When I was back at Penn State as a grad student, I knew a faculty member there who was in the process of pursuing promotion, pursuing tenure, which is a really hard thing to do. Everywhere, and at Penn State, it was a really, really hard thing to do because it's this big research institution. And after a few years of the stress of trying to pump out all this work, he developed an ulcer from the stress. It made him physically sick, right? Pretty seriously physically sick. That happens to people. That does not happen to zebras, right? So we all experience stress. Do you all think that zebras ever experience stress? Yeah. Zebras have days where lions are trying to eat them. That sounds pretty stressful. That sounds worse than a test to me, right? But the thing is that what their body does when a lion tries to eat them and what my body does when I have a panic attack because I'm getting ready for this talk tonight, and all of a sudden I get a phone call from my wife that says, oh my gosh, I need to pick up James from daycare in Moscow in 20 minutes, and I have a flat tire. Right? This is what happened to me like 2 hours ago. So I'm freaking out, jumping in the car and running to Moscow and back. Right? My body's doing the same thing that zebra's body is doing whenever a lion tries to eat it. Right? The difference is that zebras and pretty much every other animal on the planet, particularly ones that aren't influenced by human beings, they get stressed for short periods of time at acute danger, and then once that danger is gone, they're not stressed anymore. Right? So acute stress is not a problem. Like that zebra freaks out, right? He starts running. He either gets eaten, right? And then stress isn't a problem. He's dead, right? No stress. Or he gets away. And also, stress is not a problem. He just chills out again. His system kind of, gets back to normal. The difference with human beings is I can stay stressed all day, every day, especially if I kind of let my brain keep running. I can exist in this very comfortable, pleasantly lit, temperature-controlled room and be totally stressed out. There's no lion here, but I can exist that way. And it's that chronic stress that creates the problems for us. That translates to that. So what do we do about this, right? If you guys want, we heard about some stressful issues that people are having earlier. Strategies, some strategies are like coping strategies for stress, okay? So you could have a problem-centered approach to stress, right? So if my stress is related to my finances, I might try to solve that problem. Can I get a part-time job? Can I, look for some scholarships, some financial aid? I have a student right now that I've had in class a couple of times who I was talking to about scholarships, and he was telling me about how he applied for over 900 scholarships. He was awarded over 200 of them. He pays nothing for college, right? That's a problem-solving approach to financial stress is how can I do things to solve the problem? That's not always an issue, right? If scholarships aren't an option, if financial aid isn't an option, and it's not for a lot of us, then what do we do, right? So in that case, I might say, well, I could take an emotion-centered, emotional regulation approach to stress. And I could say, I can't change this situation, but I can change the way that I deal with it, right? So I might need to let go of some things, not worry about some things, right, that don't really impact me, or things that I can't control, right? Or I might need to, develop some techniques. I've got mindfulness on the screen again, because I find mindful practices to be very effective at dealing with my stress. I tend to be pretty stressed as a person in general. Kind of anxiety has been a part of my life for a while, and I find that if I'm sitting at my desk at work and I'm working and I'm frantically and it's like, I got a lot to do, I don't know if I'm going to have enough to do this, sometimes the best thing for me to do is stop working for just like a minute or two and just like sort of breathe, do sort of like a little breathing exercise, and I can feel my body. Like I literally feel my stress decrease, my pulse, the tension in my body decrease, and I'm not changing the situation. I'm still a very busy person, but I'm able to deal with that busyness a little bit better. And then the last one, I've talked about the importance of this quite a bit, is accessing social support, right? Human beings are very, very social creatures. We need connection to other people. And so going to somebody else for advice or for guidance. I've gotten advice from friends, family, therapists that I learned about 10 years ago that I still come back to as, oh, this is what I need to do right now. I need to take that little piece of advice that I got from somebody and put it into practice. That's what I can do about this. All right. This can be a big one for college students, right? Kelly Wilson talks about it in terms of exposure to toxins. When I talk about it with college students, I like to use the phrase, managing freedoms. College is a very fun time. There are a lot of novel, exciting experiences for many, many college students. And I wouldn't tell students like, oh, don't expose yourself to any alcohol. That would be, a really bad idea. I wouldn't do that. But I would say, manage your freedoms. You have more freedom now than you had probably a few years ago. You've got lots of opportunities. That's great. It can be really fun. But keep it in check. Sort of manage your freedoms. Think about, what am I putting in my body, right? And there's no question that there's some pretty serious adverse effects to putting the wrong types of things in our body, right? Years ago we didn't know about the impacts of things like nicotine and tobacco and all that. Now we have a much better idea. I'm a little concerned right now with the vaping thing, which isn't it's not super new, but we don't really know the effects of it at all. And my guess is it's probably not as bad as cigarettes, right? But I have a worry around the idea that it's safe. Right? I can't imagine that even if there's not combustion happening, that spraying those chemicals onto some of the most delicate tissue in our body is a safe thing. Right? So I'm a little concerned about that. Being exposed to prescription, non-prescription drugs, whether that's illicit or it's something I'm taking for a health condition that maybe I wouldn't need to be taking if I was just doing some different things. Right? And again, I think being mindful about those things is really important. When you hear people's stories who have kind of gone a little bit too far with drinking or something like that, they often describe sort of a similar story of, well, it just kind of happened. I wasn't really keeping track of it, and all of a sudden I realized it was too much. Right? So being more mindful, being more aware of what I'm putting into my body, what I'm doing. And knowing that making small changes can make a big difference, right? I had this wasn't related to toxins for me or managing my freedoms. It was more about sort of my diet and exercise. I had this thought one day that really worked for me. I decided to kind of be a little bit better at diet and exercise and those kind of things. And I had this thought came into my head. It's in terms of how mindful we are, this is kind of a problem for a lot of us. This thought came into my head. Oh, you've only been doing this for a day. Don't get too happy about it. It's not a big deal. And I right away had this other thought that, it feels a lot better to say, I've been doing this for one day, than to say, which I say a lot, which I had been saying a lot, I need to start doing this, right? Saying I just started this sounds a lot better, feels a lot better to me than saying I need to start doing this. All right. Building your social network. As I said earlier, human beings are a very social species. And it's no surprise to me that one of the biggest predictors of college success is social support and social well-being. It's something that is important to us from the day that we're born. The most important developmental task for infants is a social attachment to another human being. You can make human beings sick by just isolating them, by exposing them to social hostility and social isolation. We don't, if you think about like how our species survives on this planet, it's not because we're bigger and stronger than the other creatures on this planet. Like monsters are real. They're called grizzly bears and great white sharks and giant squids. Like, we don't win on this planet because we can beat everyone. We win on this planet because we're extremely cooperative. We're good problem solvers. Right? If you take, a group of us out into the wilderness and one of us gets left behind, that person gets eaten. They're dead, right? We don't survive that way. This is a really interesting thing that happens in the body. This is kind of like a random fact that just illustrates my point. When people are in large groups, our body wires itself to defend against viruses because viruses spread in large groups, right? If you take someone and you isolate them by themselves, their body will start wiring itself to defend infection, right? Because what happens when you're left off by yourself and that lion attacks you, right? You get bit, you get cut, and you get infections. Your body actually knows that and prepares for that. It's crazy. If you think about even the most similar species on the planet to us, the most similar primates on the planet, right? None of them have a white portion to their eye. Do you ever think about that? We've got these eyes that pretty significant portion of them are white, right? So we got the pupil, the iris, this big white portion, right? Chimpanzees, maybe our closest relative, they don't have that. Their eyes are just dark. Do you know why that is? It's because they're not as cooperative as us, right? What can I do with the white part of my eye, right? We can be looking at each other, and if I do this, what do you want to do? Well, yeah, it's awkward. But I'm sending you a signal. Look over there, right? We could be out in the wilderness. I'm trying to tell you, hey, there's a bear. We're backpacking in North Idaho. There's a bear over there, right? And I don't want to make a sound, so I just do this, right? I can communicate with you. That's how social we are. There's no other animal in the wild that does that. There is one animal that I bet a lot of you can think of that does have a white part of their eye. What'd you say? Yeah, dogs, right? Dogs have evolved alongside human beings for 50,000 years, helping us hunt, protecting us while we sleep, right? So I can do that with my dog Sam. I can look and he will look, right? I can point at something. If I point at if I'm in this room with a chimpanzee and I point, the chimpanzee looks at the tip of my finger. If I'm in this room with my dog and I point, he looks at what I'm pointing at, right? That's that social connection. There's so much importance in social connection for human beings. So this is something we can do intentionally. We can intentionally grow our network. If you're worried about your social network, I don't have enough connections on campus, be intentional about it, right? Ask yourself, how am I growing this network? Ask yourself, what does my social network look like? Is this a network that has a lot of hostility, a lot of isolation? I met with a student the week before break who was telling me that her social network makes her miserable. They're not cool. They take stuff without asking. They if I don't offer to pick them up every time they come into town, they never want to talk to me again. And I'm that's not a good social network. A good social network doesn't have that kind of hostility and isolation in it. So be intentional about building your social network. It is much, much more important than you probably realize, right? And I find that having a social network of people that have like common interests. When I was back in Pennsylvania and I was training jiu-jitsu all the time, that was a big social network for me, was everybody from my gym, right? We had this like natural connection. So if you're into something, like find a student organization, find a group that is into that sort of thing. You'll probably find like-minded individuals that you can connect with, right? It's a really cool thing about college that I promise you, you will never have the opportunities that you have right now in terms of like pursuing random interests, whether those are classes or clubs or intramurals or whatever. Like use this time. You'll never have this again. It's a really cool part of college. All right, and the last thing, right? And maybe one of those things that we don't immediately think about in terms of our health and well-being, but I know is really important, is are we engaging in meaningful activity, right? When Kelly Wilson talks about this, when I've heard him talk about it a few different times, he talks about Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you don't know what the book is about, Viktor writes about surviving the Holocaust, surviving concentration camps. And his big takeaway was that the people that survived were the people that had something to live for. They weren't like the biggest, fittest, strongest, healthiest people at the start. They were the people that had something to live for, that had meaning. I know this is something that for years I've been looking at academically, is how to help people find meaningful activity. I wrote a paper on this years ago, was how do we help, this is for middle schoolers, this is a program we designed for middle schoolers, how do we help them figure out what they enjoy that's good for them? Like, what are they doing with their free time in terms of, their activities, physical activities and things like that? How do we help them identify those things and overcome roadblocks to get involved in those things? Because this is really, really important to us. When we get to the end of our lives, I talked about this in my lifespan development class today. We were talking about death and dying. It's the least fun lecture of the semester. But we were talking about it because it turns out people who feel like their life has had meaning aren't afraid of death, or they're much less afraid of death than people who don't. It's like at the end of the day, what meaning has my life had? And even on a smaller scale, like what meaning did today have? Did I do something meaningful today? All right. Where are we at? We're almost out of time. Talked about all these things. So what I want to do now, and I've got more handouts that are specifically aimed at this, but you can probably do this on your own as well, with your laptop, your notebook. If you're, with us remotely with the stream, then you can do this on your own with a notebook or a laptop. Think about these sort of 7 areas we've talked about, right? Give a little thought to, where am I doing pretty well? Maybe the kind of person that likes to exercise every day, or at least 4 or 5 times a week or something like that. And you're like, I'm not going to exercise out of the park. It's also like meaningful activity for me, so I've got those covered, right? But I'm not sleeping very well. And I tend to be stressed out a lot, right? So I'm doing really well on a couple things, not so well on a couple other things, right? And then just try to think about simple things that you can do to improve your self-care even a little bit, okay? So maybe it's, sleep is something I want to identify, so I'm gonna set a bedtime for myself. I know that sounds like I'm a middle schooler, but in many ways it sounds like, I'm actually a responsible adult because I realize that this is important, right? So I'm going to set a standard bedtime for me. Or I'm going to do something like no technology in my bed or in my bedroom, right? If your bedroom is your overall room, then I realize that's more challenging. So it might just be like, okay, no tech in my bed, right? Bedtime's bedtime, It might be, I'm going to start taking the 12-minute walk to get the more nutritious food because, not because I necessarily want to, but I'm willing to, okay? It's kind of like where these ideas should be leading us. Isn't just, oh, I showed up, I asked myself some questions, I listened to Robbie talk about like some of these concerns he sees with students and ways to address them, and I gained some awareness, right? Or I gained some insight about what I might need to be doing. I think that's really overrated if we don't make changes, if we don't adjust our behavior around it. It's that question of, what are you doing and how's it working out for you? Okay? So what I want you to do, each person, give some thought, and I'll go back to the areas here in a second. Give some thought to each one of those 7 areas of self-care that I talked about. There they are. Ask yourself, A, like, how am I doing with this? Do I need a little more emphasis? Even if we're doing well, we could probably do a little bit more, right? Do I need a little bit more emphasis on this? Do we need a lot more emphasis on this area of self-care? And then for each one, might be more challenging for the ones you do really well. For each one, what is one small thing that you can do to improve that area of your self-care? Okay? This is really the big question of the evening, is what's one small thing? I like things that are specific, that are measurable, right? So if I say, what are you going to do about your sleep? And you say, oh, I'm going to start sleeping more. If I come back to you next week and I say, have you been sleeping more? You might go, oh, one night I did well, the other night, yeah, I'm not sure. If you tell me, I'm going to set a bedtime 11 p.m. every night, I could come to you next week and say, did you do this? And you could say yes, or you could say no, right? So I like measurable goals. I like goals that are attainable. I've been guilty at sometimes. I'm getting a smile here. Maybe that sounds familiar. I've been guilty at times in my life of setting excessive goals that I can't possibly reach, and then I just get discouraged and give up. Like, oh, I'm going to write for 8 hours today. That's absurd, right? Turns out a goal of 1 hour or 2 hours is much more reasonable. So those work a lot better for me. Okay. So please, each person, for each of the 7 areas, one small thing you could do, and I'm going to ask for examples here in a little bit. Okay, go ahead. I've got a handout for this too. If anyone would like it, just let me know and I'll come around with them. All right, so I'd like to hear a little bit about what we're going to do going forward, okay? So if you could think about, and maybe it's most useful to think about those areas of self-care that you'd like to focus on the most, right? Those things that you're like, oh, I need a lot more focus in this area. I'd like to hear what's the one small thing, maybe it's not such a small thing, but at least one small thing that you'd like to start doing. Anybody? Anybody have a good one? Something attainable, something specific, measurable? Yeah. Get more sleep. Okay? Can we get more specific than that? Okay. 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 What's the routine look like? Yeah. So sleep, it's not just like, oh, I'm awake this minute, I'm sleeping the next, right? You got to do stuff first. Like you should probably brush your teeth. It's probably a good idea, right? You should probably be nice to the people around you, say goodnight. So yeah, setting up that routine, setting the time is a big one for that start, right? What was over here? Shh. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. A lot of times, it's not that we wouldn't want to be doing that or that we can't do that. It's that we just lose track of it. We're not aware. We're not intentional. I like you're, thinking about being intentional about those things, right? And making time for those social connections. I've had a lot of talks with a lot of students over the past 6 years or so who come to me and they say, I'm dealing with a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. And I say, what does your day look like? And they spend a lot of time, and they're like, oh, I spend a lot of time by myself. And I'm like, that is not helping. Like, even if all you do is go to the Cub and really interact directly with no one, but you're around people, that's better than that isolation that we sometimes do. So be intentional, push yourself. And for you, if you've got this nice social network, it's just a matter of making more time for them. What else? Who's got a good one? Something like, if I asked you tomorrow, have you started this? You could tell me yes or no. You have a good one? It's pretty good? All right. What is it? Okay. Now I'm afraid of what it is. How about one more? One more and we'll be done with that. There we go. That always works. That always works. Okay, nice. So I like that because you've got, this is how often it happens. This is how long each workout is. It's like daily, it's this many hours. And 2 hours for some people might not be attainable. For you, that might be like, yeah, I can totally do this, right? So that's great. Okay, well, we're pretty much out of time. I appreciate your attention throughout the hour and a half program and your participation. Hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon. Thank you.